Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Virreta, and I'm the Research Coordinator for 21 CSLA. I'd like to welcome you to today's research practice webinar entitled Leading Towards Justice with Transformative Social Emotional Learning. As a former school psychologist, mental health and wellness school leader, and school administrator, I'm excited about today's topic and its implications for equity. Today's webinar is hosted by 21 CSLA. We are dedicated to the professional learning and support of California's educational leaders at the teacher, site, and district levels to create more equitable learning environments that ultimately improve success for underserved students. The commitment that guides our work is that Leaders for Equity transform education by improving access, opportunity, and inclusion for both students and adults. Our focus is particularly on those who are systemically marginalized and historically underserved, ensuring that everyone in our educational community has the opportunity to thrive. 21 CSLA is a project of the California Department of Education, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, and the State Board of Education. Before beginning today's webinar, we would also like to acknowledge the land that we occupy. In our active dismantling of the oppressive and erasure effects of colonial structures, we would like to acknowledge that today's webinar takes place on the land which the University of California at Berkeley occupies, the territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Muwekma Ohlone peoples. We recognize and honor the continuous presence and living history of Indigenous peoples. I would now like to introduce you to today's webinar host, Dr. Jabari Mahiri. Jabari Mahiri is a professor in the Berkeley School of Education and the Brinton Family Chair in Urban Education. He is faculty director of the Berkeley School of Education Leadership Programs and chair of the Leadership Board for the 21 CSLA State Center.
Thank you, Melissa, and welcome everyone to our 17th 21st CSLA Research Practice webinar, in which we are featuring two researchers who will share their work in social and emotional learning and be responded to by three leading practitioners who are also engaged in this work. Dr. Valerie B. Shapiro is an associate professor in Berkeley School of Social Welfare, and her studies are around the persistent gap between research and practice as it relates to the promotion of mental, emotional, and behavioral well-being in children. She is a recognized thought leader in the field of social emotional learning, particularly in the areas of assessment, implementation, knowledge mobilization, and infrastructure. She contributes her expertise to the World Health Organization and to UNESCO, and serves as the scientific director of the Special Project Advisor to Cal Hope Student Support. With her also is Dr. Maxie Lee, a veteran educator who has served the Sacramento region in many roles, including leading district-wide SEL in Sacramento City in their school district, serving as a contributing leader for the groundbreaking Collaborating Districts Initiative and the California Collaborating States Initiative, with the Collaboration for Academic SEL, Advanced SEL in California campaign, and California's Transformative SEL Skills and Conditions Workshop. Both Dr. Maxie Lee and Dr. Melissa are recent graduates of our LEAD program, Leaders for Equity and Democracy, so we're excited to see them immediately putting their expertise into the field, particularly in this webinar. So we please welcome Dr. Shapiro and Dr. Lee to the spotlight.
So much. I'm sharing my screen now and turning it over to Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Dr. Mahiri and Dr. Shapiro. I wanted to first start by just building a little bit of context around the practice of the Cal Hope Student Support effort. This effort is grounded in the collectivist approach of a community of practice, especially the practice of co-construction and partnership. And you can see here the many different partners that span across sectors, regions, in our research practice partnerships. Next slide, please. We also want to acknowledge that our Cal Hope Student Support is very much grounded in prior work in California, as you can see, spanning back several years. But really, this effort is expanding beyond the traditional approach of social emotional learning implementation as transactional, individualistic, and linear. Our current project and effort really shifts the paradigm of social emotional learning to include focused attention on community and partnerships as levers of change. Next slide, please. So with that said, and with transformative social emotional learning in mind, we're really aiming to co-construct sustainable and supportive systems where all Californian young people and adults can thrive. Next slide. So undergirding the goal of collectivist thriving is the critical and ongoing calibration between research and practice partners, including our statewide team, our county leaders, and the educators they work with across districts and schools, including students, staff, families, and of course, our research partners. Specifically, we work closely with our research partners at UC Berkeley's School of Social Welfare to inform and improve our practice as we continue to iterate and engage in feedback loops, learning and improving as a collective. With that, I will now turn this over to Dr. Shapiro to share more about the research bolstering this statewide community of practice.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. I'm going to introduce two frameworks here that are really important to research and practice. One is systemic SEL. So as Mahiri was saying, this is not the old Castle 5, which you might recognize in the middle, or it's not only the Castle 5. This is an approach to SEL that engages every layer and component of our complex educational system to support and integrate and sustain SEL across all youth-serving contexts and over time. This involves academic integration, school-wide culture shifts, and authentic partnerships with young people, with families, and to the expanded learning and allied community structures. The other important framework is transformative SEL. So you'll see here a clear depiction of inequality, where one child is getting the fruit from this tree and one child is not. So when we think about SEL, historically, this might be about teaching this young person to manage their emotions in the context of injustice. And recently, there's been equity elaborations that have come from CASEL, which says this child doesn't just need to manage their emotions, they also need agency to make change in the world, the change that they'd like to see. And this other young child that's getting the fruit doesn't just need to make a responsible decision, which in this context might mean eating the fruit and nourishing themselves and giving themselves some self-care. Those are all great, but they also need curiosity about the world around them. So you can see here these equity elaborations really expand the notion of what social and emotional competencies children need to navigate the world that we live in and to create the world that we want to live in together. You'll see these other depictions here of resources being distributed to try to make the situation better, although not solve the problem. You'll see here, maybe we need different resources for different contexts. That's true. But also our vision of justice is that we don't just need to distribute tools, we also need scaffolds and supports to right this tree. And as Dr. Lee and I have worked together with many others, maybe perhaps many of you in the audience across 3 years of CalHope student support, we realized that although this concept of systemic SEL and TSEL have been articulated, that's systemic SEL and transformative SEL, we don't really know in practice what these scaffolds and what these tools look like. So we've been working really hard to innovate in practice and to study this so that we can begin sharing it broadly, like with all of you. Our logic model looks like this. We're seeking to have all young people and adults in school have improved engagement, performance, and well-being. And traditionally, we've done that by trying to improve competencies like self-awareness and self-management and the equity elaborations that I just mentioned, which become the roots that really keep folks grounded when there's the inevitable storm, also can travel with people to new environments and new settings. But our work realizes that one person's competencies, the competencies of students in your classroom, become your climate. and the climate shapes opportunities for competency development. So we think these are really reciprocal processes and need to be understood in a way that everybody needs safety, connection, opportunities for voice and leadership, and experiences of culturally and linguistically responsive practices in order to develop their competencies. But most centrally, what this project has focused on is levers to transform the system, realizing that competencies and climates don't just happen without really cultivating and transforming our systems. The 4 levers that we focus on are partnerships. These are equity enhancing, trusting, mutually beneficial partnerships that might be between research and practice, but also between healthcare and education, also across the regions of our diverse state, also from county office to district office to school site, allied with youth and with families. Supports are really exciting. Supports are the funding that you need, the time that you need, the training that you need, the technical assistance that you need in order to really implement SEL well. The capacities are what each person in this system needs in order to know how to implement SEL, to have the skills to do it, to have the mindsets and the attitudes to do it, but also to have the confidence to just do something differently. And finally, the structures and routines of SEL implementation are the things that are happening on the ground that makes SEL implementation come to life at the classroom level, the school level, with adults, with kids, at the district level, at the county level, and at the state level. This is the last part of our model, which really shows our systemic approach, where we're bringing things into alignment and coordination. In addition to just being multi-level, we've involved research partners so that we can use the latest research evidence and put it into a community of practice, a statewide community of practice between County Office of Education leads that then irrigate these resources. They put them to where they are most needed, wanted, and beneficial, becoming regional implementation support hubs all around the state. But then we know California is a very diverse state and the local context matters. So our theory says that if you put the sunlight, the water, and the local air together, you get glucose. That's what happens at the school sites, where it's the energy force that evolves well-intended initiatives into nourishing outcomes in the ground and let all of our poppies thrive. Here's what we've learned so far from a research perspective. I'm going to tell you a little about what we've learned for each of the levers. So first, partnerships. Here, what you see here is we divided up, we looked all across the state and we divided up county offices that had fewer partnerships, 0 to 5, and partnerships means, are they working with youth? Are they working with the expanded learning sector? Are they working with their COEs? All different kinds of partnerships. And then we looked at the ones that have higher numbers of partnerships involved and engaged in this CalHope initiative. And what we see here is that these blue bars, folks that have more diverse partnerships, we see higher levels of all the other levers engaged. So we conclude here that CEO leaders having a greater variety of partnerships, and this can be applied to leaders at all different levels. Greater variety of partnerships mean more engagement of supports, capacities, and routines for implementation. For supports, we looked qualitatively at the different kind of supports that have been offered through CalHope student support. And what we found out is a lot of people are irrigating these tools throughout the state of California. Tools like the SEL roadmap, the CASEL framework, but they're also doing a lot of training. They're doing co-training. They're providing time for people to get together and sit in community of practice to extend their learning. They're also, the COEs are providing technical assistance. That's coaching to support each SEL school that they're partnering with around installing these routines and structures and routines of implementation. And some people are also doing quality assurance. They're making sure that people have what they need in order to score well on implementation rubrics or fidelity integrity assessments. Then as we come into capacities, we have developed an SEL Foundations course here at UC Berkeley that has been offered now for 3 semesters at no expense to educators that enroll in this course. This course is designed for classroom teachers and has now been, we've now enrolled nearly 1,500 educators from nearly 1,000 schools, nearly 500 districts in almost all California counties. And we've done really rigorous research to show that folks who complete this course really have changed attitudes. I believe SEL is very important for student performance. Have new skills. I'm able to use my students' cultural background to help make learning meaningful. Have enhanced knowledge. I can explain the concept of systemic SEL to a colleague and have self-efficacy. I have the confidence that I can integrate SEL into academics, etc. So we're really excited about building capacities all around the state. And lastly, our structures and routines for implementation. Here, what we've done is actually survey state leaders, again, all across the state, and see that we are now seeing that we have significant differences statewide. So this is really exciting. This is across last year from fall to spring. We have statistically significant change in district leaders reporting equity-oriented SEL implementation. We have school leaders reporting enhanced well-being. And we have school leaders reporting stronger capacities for equity-oriented SEL implementation at the school level. So what we collectively conclude is that when all of these systems are engaged and coordinated and working together, we have partnerships, we have supports, we're building capacities, and we're installing structures and routines together through our collective constructed vision. We're all moving through the same continuous improvement process, even if it looks different in all the local levels, we're able to transform together. So our takeaways for system leaders is, one, partnership is a critical driver for transformative change. We want to encourage each one of you that's listening today to reach out to your local and regional colleagues. We now have experts at SEL implementation in each county office, and there are many district leads and school sites that have engaged in CalHope, and you might be one of them, or they might be new partners for you. So I encourage you to reach out. We also want to make sure you know that CalHope supports are available. We have specialized COPs through Greater Good in Education, some that are actually working on SEL with parents and caregivers, families. They have modules, so if you're someone that provides training in your local community, there are beautiful modules available for you to use to train in your local communities, to provide facilitated experiences. And they also have an array of practices. If you want to inspire positive emotions in your school, go to ggie.berkeley.edu, and you'll find an array of practices ready for application right there. We also have available through CalHope Student Support surveys that we have designed and validated at UC Berkeley, free, available for use, and a surveying tool that can interface with your student information system quite easily. Learn more at the link that's here, calhopesel.org/project. We also have focus group protocols that you can use with young people, and webinars that explain how to actually use this data for improvement purposes. So we hope you'll check that out. We also mentioned that capacities can be built, and we have this SEL Foundations course that has been so successful. If you yourself or you know of classroom teachers or expanded learning professionals that would like to take this course, you can use this interest form, and feel free to please share that widely. And finally, about the structures and routines on the ground for transformative SEL, we're going to pass it over to our expert panel so you can see and get a feel for what this is like in practice. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shapiro and Dr. Lee, for this thoughtful research and reflections. You all covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time. So I want to encourage our participants in this webinar to click on the link that we provided in the chat, where you can get the slide deck and you can go back over and peruse some of these important resources and implications from the research, the partnerships, the supports, the capacities that are capable of being built, and the structures and other resources that are available. I'd like to now transition to our practitioner panelists, and we're honored to have three principals who represent school districts across California. They include, first, Dyane Plumly, principal at Monarch School in the San Diego County of Education, a K-12 program that serves unhoused students and families With 15 years of experience working in this district and in juvenile courts and community schools in various roles, she is dedicated to advancing equity and designing healthy learning communities where every student feels valued, welcomed, and heard. Also, we have Dr. Courtney Curtis. He's a principal at Hoover High School, located in Fresno Unified School District. Dr. Curtis is an educational leader in the Fresno Unified School District system, and he spent 19 years serving as a teacher, coach, mentor, vice principal, and principal. He has served at both the middle and high school levels, as well as at the district level within the school leadership department. And Dr. Curtis holds a bachelor's degree in social science, a master's in educational leadership, and a doctorate in educational leadership. And also we have Tiffany Wheldan, principal at Oak Ridge Elementary in Sacramento City Unified School District. Tiffany has served as an educator in this district for the past 24 years as a teacher, training specialist, assistant principal, and advocate for restorative justice in school settings. Ms. Wheldan is passionate about reimagining systems that perpetuate reimagining systems that perpetuate racial inequality within existing school structures. So if we can go to our next slide, we have framing questions that we would like each of our practitioners to respond to. And then we want to ask them individual questions that they can address from their own positionality in the context of leadership that they're occupying. And the framing question, which is on this slide, is, as a school leader, how are you thinking about the system's transformation through equity and justice-centered social-emotional learning? And you can keep in mind that there's a lot of background to this question. Traditional school systems implementation of any priority or any new initiative comes with a set of must-do fidelity checks and transactional tasks. So keep this question in mind in relationship to this context. And we'd like to first go to Dyane and have you begin to address this framing question that bridges the research that was just presented by our scholars to what's going on in particular contexts and in particular settings.
Thank you, Dr. Mahiri. So I think to begin with this question, I'd like to share a little bit about the San Diego County Office of Education, because all of our work is guided by what we call our North Star vision. So in San Diego County, about half of the students qualify for free or reduced lunch. So the county office has really put forth this vision of reducing that number over the course of the next few years. And at the county office, we it's juvenile court and community schools. We're supporting all of our districts in the county, but we consider ourselves the first one. And so when thinking about systems transformation, I think that that work is really guided by that goal, and it helps to shape and think about what partnerships that we have at our school site and the supports that we want to integrate. So it's really this belief that our school can be a hub of these resources and supports for our students and for their families, and beginning with making sure that all of our kids and families feel really that sense of belonging from the moment that they come into our space. So I think we'll go into that more with the question, but I would kind of open with that frame that we have with our vision of the work that we do.
Thank you. And Dr. Courtney, could you go ahead with your response to that question?
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Courtney Curtis, and in my reality, I'm in Fresno Unified School District, the third largest district in California. And I guess just my short answer to this question would be, like, I'm looking at the slide that they presented earlier around systematic SEL, and I'm looking at it almost as a plate where you have the SEL in the middle. And I just really would want to hone in on the fact that it's important that we strategically involve all of our stakeholders in this work, not just our school staff, but our students, our families, and communities. And I'm even thinking about our church partners and who are the key people in the community that we need to include in this work. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later in the individual question, but just I'm thinking about during the time what we all experienced with COVID, those fun years, and the fact that we were able to be successful at the school site that I was at was really solely due to the fact that we involved our community all the way along the way. So when it was hard to reach our families, we reached out to our churches, right? When our families didn't have the food they needed, or they didn't have the clothes, they didn't have whatever else it may be, or even if a student just needed someone to, or a family needed someone to connect with them, you know, we would leverage our community pastors to be able to help teach that SEL. Because I'm thinking about the SEL piece, even beyond like organizations that are built just for that, but how do we leverage our community partners that have gone through life? How do we leverage them to be able to help SEL on our site? So that's kind of my short answer.
Thank you, thank you. Also, let's move to Tiffany and let you give us a response to our framing question that tries to bridge the research that just was presented to your particular school context.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you. So I think first, just one thing I always like to start with is just the importance of the self-work we do before we implement systems. I think there's always has to be that opportunity to really think about our own cultural identities and how that impacts the systems we're creating and the pedagogy we're using, and about our power and our privilege and how that positions us in our daily interactions with those other stakeholders. Because without that unlearning and that self-work, I think we risk turning transformational into transactional. And so I think within this work, really, when we've done that self-work, we can build with intentionality. We can look at the lived experiences of our community members. We can learn about the local and global history of our students. We can understand the neighborhood and how the experiences of our students have impacted. And then just really collectively building. I think it's so important that we have the superpowers of our team that we work with alongside us, and we really leverage those, and we really listen to our families and our community to build something that fits uniquely just to our community. And I think that's one of the biggest shifts of this, is that we're not looking to package a curriculum. We're looking to build an SEL program that fits the community and our students' lived experiences.
Tiffany, thank you for moving us from this notion of how a traditional paradigm of transactional oriented tasks can be moved to the transformational. And of course, we know from our researchers that the transformational includes these partnerships, these supports, these capacities, and these structures and routines. We're going to bring them back in just a minute, but before we do, we want to ask each of you a more targeted question that allows you to address some of these considerations from the standpoint of your own local context. And we'll start again first with you, Dyane. Where are the levers for transformational change in your organization, and how do you see them integrating into the work that you do in SEL?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So you shared a little bit about the program that I'm at, Monarch School in San Diego. We're really unique for a couple of reasons. One of them is that we're a K-12 program, and we serve students who are unhoused across San Diego County. The other piece about us is that although a county office program, we have very much adopted the community school strategy, and one of our partners, our biggest partner, is a nonprofit Monarch School project. And if you were in our building, you wouldn't know which staff belonged where, and that's really intentional because it's how we're thinking about how we align the supports that we have. I think another really important thing to kind of lead with when answering this question is just the idea that we center so much of what we do on creating that sense of belonging for our students, that many of the students in Monarch, but also across JCCS, who county office operates, have been marginalized in their prior experiences, maybe haven't felt connected to school. And so we begin with that work so that we can get to really thinking about that transformational kind of teaching and learning, that we want our kids and our families to know that they belong, that they are participants and contributors in our space first. And that when they have that, I think that we operate with this, our kids and our families have that dignity and that worth so that they can really pursue their interests and also like future plans. So thinking again about like that North Star vision and how we think about the community school strategy and that idea of a the school being a hub of resources, I can share a little bit about what that looks like for us or how we leverage our partners at the school site. So we begin, and we can do this because we are smaller. We operate about 260 students or serve about 260 students a year with an intake process that we've really shifted into thinking about a welcoming orientation. And what that is when a family comes to enroll at our school, we're really getting to know them first through an orientation process and learning what is it that they need, what has their experience been, what supportive services might we need to be able to connect them to. And that's really important because we're thinking about the child and their whole family. And through our partnership with Monarch School Project, we're able to leverage some of those supports. So some of the supports that we're able to have at our school include like a mental health team. We have like licensed practitioners who see not only our students, but their families, our alumni. We have a behavior intervention support team. And then we have this wonderful parent engagement team. And they really think about what supports, and we're thinking about getting our families housed, right? Do they need access to our food pantry? We have a monthly farmers market. We have bi-monthly family dinners to build that connection with our families. But it's really thinking about what does this family need for our kiddos to be successful. And we even tap into them before they've enrolled at school. So we have classes like dance and art for kids who are not even kindergarten age yet for our building. So I think what we design for our families and our students comes from that welcoming orientation. So when it's thinking about what supports do we need, how do we integrate this into our building, it's knowing what our families are asking for us first, right? So really getting their contribution in that way, so then we are being responsive directly to their needs. We also, in terms of a little bit of more like routine kind of SEL work, do some learning in our elementary classrooms around sources of strength, which really builds kind of student skills around speaking about like an emotional wheel. And then that moves into middle school and high school students really thinking about themselves as like a mentor or a club. And again, it's that participation from our students and families that helps guide what we decide to do next. So it's not always a one way, but being responsive to what they might need in September this year might look different than the needs for next year.
Thank you, Dyane, for giving us more insight into your partnerships, your support systems, and your structures and routines in your area. I want to move also to the notion that these transformations will not occur without transformative leaders initiating those. So I'd like to ask Courtney, how do you embody justice, equity-centered, social emotional learning as a systems leader?
Yeah, so what I would share, first of all, just thank you for that question. What I would share is that in order to embody this, first of all, it's important to actually take the time to do the learning around cultural proficiency, learning about yourself. And Tiffany kind of spoke about this a little bit earlier. And before the webinar, I had to take a moment to grab just some of the books that I have gone through. Like I was grabbing, my cultural proficiency book, and I was grabbing my belonging and inclusion in identity safe schools, and was just thinking about, in order to do this, you have to be intentional about taking the time to learn about your own implicit biases, your own explicit biases, and really thinking about that whole inside out approach, right? And then not only just learning about it, but actually learning alongside others. So like in our reality in Fresno Unified, we actually have different spaces where this type of learning can take place. So for example, I'm a part of a couple of different groups, a group called AAPU, which is African American Principals United, and then another group, Men of Color in Educational Leadership, and then just other spaces where we're able to do these studies together in terms of just growing in our own leadership, right? The other key bucket that I would really call out that's important in order to embody this type of leadership is taking the time to learn about your community. And I know that Dyane spoke about this a little bit already, but taking the time to actually to visit the community itself, right? Knowing that the school's in the community, but far too often we as leaders and educators, we don't go to the neighborhoods, right? We don't go to their homes. And even though it's a scary thing, sometimes, like yesterday, I was doing a home visit for one of our young men, but the parents invited me in and I got to sit there, at their dining room table and have a conversation with the mom and dad about their hopes, their dreams, and their wishes for their child, right? And then, like I mentioned earlier, having those relationships with our community pastors, right? And then all of the other key stakeholders in the community. So that way we're able to learn from them. And then one last thing I'll share related to this is when I was a middle school principal, we actually were intentional about, for one of our buyback meetings, where a professional learning meeting, we kind of pivoted and we actually did a parent panel where we invited parents from all backgrounds in order to just listen to them. Like no agenda, just to listen to their hopes, their dreams, and wishes. So they're able to help us with that plate, that SEL plate. And then lastly, I would share is just taking the time to genuinely gather student voice. That is essential in this work of SEL. And then the other piece I would call out also is just not being afraid to have those tough conversations. As a leader, as you continue to learn more and more about yourself, sadly, not all in education are going to be on the same boat with you. I know sometimes some won't like to use the word equity, or some will, looking at that diagram that they were showing earlier with the tree, right? And putting things in place. Not all people are not always going to be in the same mind frame, and they're going to often think that, you know, if we're giving something to one group, you're taking away from another. So being able to be courageous and have those tough conversations. So I would really boil it down to those 4 things: taking the time to learn about yourself, knowing your community well, student voice, and then just not being afraid to have those tough conversations. And those conversations are much easier when you have a network around you of people who are learning just like you are.
Thank you, Courtney. And you ended on an important note. Dyane helped us think a little bit about partnerships and supports and structures and routines. You helped us go a little bit further into the area of capacities and the learning that is involved in the notion that is ongoing, is continuous in terms of what leaders need to do in relationship to building their capacities. Tiffany, I'd like to ask you, what does an equity justice approach to emotional learning look like, sound like, and feel like on your campus? Let's illuminate what this actually appears to be when it's in operation in a school context.
I would love to. Thank you. I think, again, I want to start just with a quick note of what it's not, you know, to know what it looks, sounds, and feels like. It's important to know that it does not look like something that can be packaged. It does not look like asking students for assimilation. It is not a behavior management tool, and it's not an intervention for young people who come to us with tier 2 and tier 3 needs. So then what does it look like? It sounds like guiding students on our campus, and again, this is unique to us, through their cultural wealth and their identity within the broader social context. It feels like navigating conflict with collective accountability. It feels like discovering that you have allies and that you are building community with those allies and working through real lived experiences. It's connection coming first, and that's through things like community circles and home visits. It looks like relevant texts and novels that resonate with students, where we can have discussions about real things that are happening in their real worlds. It sounds like student voices being centered as experts and allowing them to guide community-based projects. It looks like regulation stations in every classroom for every student, not at the suggestion of the teacher, but because students understand how their brains are impacted by stress and they can sense when they need those regulation stations. It feels like authentic joy and laughter in the classroom, because that's what students remember. It sounds like me apologizing a lot, because on lots of days I fall short and I get it wrong. And I model that for my team. And as adults, we say please, we say thank you, and we apologize a lot. And lastly, I guess just many days, it feels and it looks impossible and messy. And I think that's how we know that we're truly doing work on the right track. I think about a lot often on the tougher days, or the messier days, as we might call them, what Dr. Bettina Love says about creating schools. And She says we must struggle to create the schools we are taught to believe are impossible, schools that are built on justice, love, joy, and anti-racism. So I think if it feels impossible and it looks impossible, then we're probably doing just the work that needs to be done to be transformational and justice-oriented. Thank you.
Well, thank you, principals, for these enlightening and insightful understandings of these different aspects of how it actually works itself out on the ground. Now we would like to welcome back our research presenters and open the floor up to audience questions. And this first question that I'd like to ask that comes from the audience is focused toward the panelists, but I want the researchers to also be ready to join in from the perspective of what they think about this question relative to the research sites that they were operating in. And the question is, why did the panelists, well, let's give it a little bit of background. There's so many initiatives going on simultaneously at one time at schools. So why did the panelists decide to prioritize SCL in the context of all of these other initiatives that are going on? So who would like to start in terms of our panelists?
I'm happy to share. I've been in the same district for 24 years, and I've been looking at essentially the same outputs, whether we're talking about academics or suspension data or whatever that factor may be. And it just the priority for me was the need to do something different, because they say doing the same thing twice and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. And so this is something different. This is something that really truly allows us to engage with our students in a new way. And the academic, the behavior, the outcomes that we are seeing as we prioritize this work is phenomenal and justifies every moment spent prioritizing it.
Other considerations from our practitioners?
I would piggyback off what Tiffany shared, that as I spoke to a little bit earlier, at Monarch and at JCCS, we're serving the most marginalized students in our county. And so I think we have always approached the idea that we have to do something different, and that something different really begins with making sure our students and families feel like they belong in our setting, that the school is a place that wants them and welcomes them and invites them to participate. And that work begins a lot with that SEL so that we can get to the other outcomes that we're looking for. But first, I think kids have to be excited about where they are, and that happens when they feel like they belong where they are.
Thank you. I'd like for our researchers to think about this question and weigh in on it first, and then have our practitioners also weigh in on it. It's a really interesting question that's asking, do you think the community school model will be a strong way to move towards a more equity elaboration framework to SEL? So Maxie and Valerie, can you lead us in a bit of response to that question?
Well, I'll go, since I think I threw a bit of a response to the question, and my response was 100%. And I say that because I think that in the work of community schools, at least in the conversations I'm having with my counterpart here at SCOE, we're really talking about whole collective community thriving and what that looks like, and what that feels like. And we're really leaning into this idea of community and critical well-being. So what does that mean? That means that we are co-constructing towards thriving for all of us in partnership, in community with our families, with our partners, with our educators, with our leaders, across multiple sectors, because this work cannot be done in siloed, and certainly this work cannot be done by a leader, by a school, by a district. That we have to really wrap our arms around each other and think about this idea of co-construction and co-designing towards critical well-being.
Dr. Shapiro, would you like to add anything?
I think Dr. Lee is brilliant, so I'll leave it there.
All right. Then let's move on and talk about some of the potential obstacles to implementing this wonderful approach to engaging community, engaging additional resources, increasing capacities. And it's around a question that anyone can weigh in on. What advice do panelists and researchers have for implementing SEL practices school-wide? And where do you start? And what are the key obstacles to this being able to be realized in an effective way? So the floor is open.
I'll say this.
Okay.
I'll be super quick. We've seen time and time again through the research that it starts with the adults. So if you start with the kids and the adults don't embody this, don't know how to practice this themselves, it doesn't work as successfully. But then I'll turn it over to you.
But I'd like for you to talk just a little bit more about starting with the adults. Are you talking about the adults in the school? Are you talking about the adult partners who are participating in the program for their own interests? Are you talking about the adults who are parents, or all of them?
As many adults as you can bring into the conversation are the adults that you want to start with. But I think very often SEL has been constructed as something for kids and something that we're trying to get some level of competence or skills in our kids without thinking about the environment and the adults that are scaffolding their development. And the learning science tells us that they do need these skills, but the best way to nurture them is through their natural environments. And the things that we've been talking about today, like connection amongst kids that is facilitated by adults and youth leadership. And those adults can be in the community, can be coaches. We don't want to forget all the different really meaningful relationships that young people have, and the power that adults have to cultivate spaces for young people.
Thank you. So Dyane, Courtney, and Tiffany, can you weigh in on this question? And at some point also, if you are aware of some of the key obstacles to implementing SEL effectively in these contexts, help us think about that also.
Yeah. To pick off where Valerie was saying, what she was saying, first of all, I agree that it's important to start with the adults. Like anytime that I have seen systems be successful, whether it's SEL or some other program, it's when we strategically take the time to allow adults to give feedback and to get so that way we're able to get buy-in, right? And really ownership. I actually want to use the word ownership instead of buy-in, right? Because really we want them to own the work. But what I would say is sometimes, though, we actually have to almost start with, at least from my perspective, start with the students first in terms of allowing them to share their voice so we kind of know what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what they're living through. And I'll just really quickly use the example of the site that I'm at now, Hoover High School. We're doing something different this year where we're pivoting, where we have something called class meetings, and we have advisory classes now for the first time in well over 10 years. And everyone, our adults, were all in different places, right? We have some adults who wanted to do it, some who didn't want to do it, right? But what was super powerful is when we started to do this last month, we had some staff members who were in a place where might not have been a fan of it, but when we actually took the time to have class circles, and the students just really had the opportunity to share what they were thinking and what they were feeling and what they were, working through. It was just super powerful. We had staff members who told us point blank, like, that was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. So them actually seeing it live and them experiencing it was different than there was power behind that versus me just telling them that it's a good thing and that you should do SEL. So sometimes we have to put the structures in place and then people to kind of get those early wins. So that way they become believers in the SEL work, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Courtney. So panelists, how do you address teacher and adult SEL while attending to the needs and development of students themselves? How do you do that simultaneously, or is it sequential? What's the process?
I think when I was thinking about obstacles, one of the first obstacles I thought about was so often we think we need to have it all figured out before we roll it out, right? And I think with the work of SEL and at our site, we call it humanity, what we do. our framework. And I think it all happened together because it really just is a way of being, and it's something we're developing and we're learning and we're building as we go. And I have these big visions of where I want to be, and we are not there yet. And there are wonderful things happening on our campus. We circle up as both students and we circle up as adults at staff meetings and such. So I think we can do them side by side. I think the obstacle that often prevents us from doing it is that we think we have to have all the answers ready. And it's okay for us not to know, and us to start and then to continue to adapt and pivot as we learn more.
Anyone else want to join in on this point or any of the points we've been discussing? We're just having a conversation now.
Yeah, I'll add to that a little bit. That I think for the adults, one of the important things is knowing that we can't do this work alone, right? And so that's why it's important to like leverage partners, but also that it's building those trusting relationships with your students and your families, but also amongst your staff, so that staff have that sense of a camaraderie. How do we build our capacity together? How do we have trusting relationships in which we can talk about the things that are going well, but also the challenges that we might be experiencing? And so when adults are able to have those trusting relationships with each other, with me, with everybody in this building, then we can really lean into each other and get the support that we need, so that we can leverage the partnerships, but also just not feel alone. I think that's a really big part of supporting us as the adults is not trying to work in those silos. And I also think that there's some other pieces too, like breaking bread with together, right? And I had shared that we do family dinners with our students, our families, our staff. I bring my kids, and it's an opportunity for us to really interact as like humans, right? And get to know the humanity of each other sometimes, rather than just in the professional context.
I love what you're saying, and the idea that you don't have to have all of the pieces in place at the beginning of the implementation of the process. But as a closing question for anyone or all of us, how do we put this process in a framework of continuous improvement? In other words, we may start without having all of the pieces in place, but do we have a design for how we elevate and continue to iterate this process such that it gets better and better? What would that look like? What would be some of the steps in that developmental process?
So I'll jump in here, and I'm hoping Dr. Shapiro will join me. I think it's really important to think about this calibration of research and practice partnerships. I think that there are opportunities for universities such as UC Berkeley to be thinking about ways that they can build partnerships alongside their school districts and their county offices, to be sort of arm in arm together to think about these big problems of educational inequities, and to think about ways that we can support each other, continuously iterate, continuously calibrate, because researchers and practitioners, if you think about it, we rely on each other to not only move the field, right, of education, educational equity, but if we think about the terminal values of equity and justice, we can't do this work alone, and we need the latest science, the latest research, the latest updates on what's working in order to iterate and to return to our practice and refine and adapt our practices in ways that we're continuously growing together. But absent of our research partners, we're trying to figure this out as practitioners, and practitioners are extremely intelligent people, but they're also extremely busy people, running schools, attending to all of the daily minutia of what it means to keep everyone moving along, right, for 6 hours each day. So I would say that research practice partnership is an important key to that loop and that continuous improvement model.
I would just really quickly add, like, I really appreciate what you said there, Mai, that just taking the time to be intentional as practitioners about the learning piece. But the other part that I want to add is, like, working in a system with over 100+ schools, with Fresno Unified being the third largest district in our state. Just the importance of, I know we've talked about community partnerships, right? But even the partnerships of school to school, right? and taking the opportunity to learn from your peers, because a lot of the times you have pockets of excellence all over our system, but we're not intentional about stealing the best from this site, and this site, and being able to leverage each other, because sometimes even in the same region, like you'll have a school just down the street that already has the relationship with that community partner or with whoever it may be, but you don't at your site. But learning from your fellow practitioners, I think, is just vitally important. So, and then that'll give you the time to have somebody to kind of piggyback off of when you're doing that learning, kind of like what Maya was talking about, because we all don't have time to sit and read every book in the world and every, piece of research. But when we take that time collectively, we can conquer a lot more.
Thank you, Courtney. And Dr. Shapiro, can I put you on the spot and ask you to give us a concluding thought to bring all of these ideas from research and practice together, which is actually the essence of what 21 CSLA is attempting to do, is show that when you blend research and practice, you actually have a much more viable way of approaching these complex problems and these possible solutions. So if you don't want to go in that direction, it's okay, but I'm going to ask you to close us out.
I'm happy to. And some people have heard me say this before, but working on Cal Hope Student Support with Mahiri and many of the other colleagues all around the state, I've said is a career highlight, because what it's meant to me is that I'm doing research that's actually relevant and progressing change. And without that transformational piece, my soul is not fed. So I just want to echo what folks are saying, that these partnerships are super important because we all have our respective expertise. And what I have seen and observed scientifically and as a human and relationally through Cal Hope Student Support is the power of relationships. And sitting in communities of practice, there's always someone with the answer to the question you didn't even know you needed to ask. So I want just to invite everyone into this big tent that we're creating with Cal Hope Student Support, but also to think in your own networks who will help you figure out the questions you need to ask and help you to build solutions.
And Valerie, could I also ask you to remind us once more of this amazing resource on Berkeley's campus of these free classes on SEL and the impact that they've been having?
Yeah, we are right up at about 1,500 folks enrolled. We'll be enrolling for the spring semester soon. It is a fully remote course, so we can have participants from all over the state, no out-of-pocket cost to educators. And there are 4 live sessions and the rest can be done asynchronously. So those live sessions are on a few Thursday evenings. And so we've designed the course to fit into the busy lives of educators, but it's also a graduate level course and quite rigorous. So the people that have finished the course and done a capstone project in their environment where they try to implement a right-sized change in 3 weeks have just talked about the profound impact it's had on their own well-being and the well-being of their students. So send anyone along who you think would enjoy that opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shapiro. And also thank you, Mahiri, our other research presenter, as well as Dyane and Courtney and Tiffany for all of the contributions that you've made and for sharing your time with us to learn more about the changing landscape of equity-centered social emotional learning in California. And before we end, we'd like to encourage everyone to share their reflections and feedback using the link that's in the chat. And we also like for you to keep an eye out for the next research practice webinar that's coming in early December. The tentative topic of this webinar is what educators need to know and be able to do with regard to artificial intelligence, big topic that we're all engaging in right now. And finally, please keep the conversations going. We look forward to staying in touch across all of the communications channels, including our website and social media. Participants, thank you all for giving us such amazing questions to prompt our researchers to go into more detail. And we'll see you all at the next webinar.